Rescued Leopard was too scared to be touched, until this woman changed everything. At first, it looked hopeless. A wild predator, trembling in the corner of a cage, scarred from years of cruelty, and a woman who refused to give up on him. But the deeper she reached for his trust, the more dangerous the fight became. Because someone powerful didn't want this leopard to heal. Someone with secrets buried in every scar on his body, that as fire, fear, and betrayal close in, her mission. To save one broken animal becomes a battle for justice and survival. Will she risk everything to free him from his past? Or will the darkness that created his fear destroy them both? Before we begin, tell me your city or country in the comments. It turns this space from a screen into a circle of real hearts. The early morning sun had barely crept over the Montana mountains when Clara Hensley's phone rang. She was already up, preparing feed for the rescued coyote pups at her small wildlife sanctuary. Her hands were covered in meat juice when she grabbed her phone. "Clara Hensley speaking," she said, wedging the phone between her ear and shoulder. "Ms. Hensley, this is Dr. Martinez from the State Wildlife Facility. We need your expertise immediately." The veterinarian's voice was tense. "We've just received a leopard from a raid on an illegal private menagerie. His condition is concerning." Clara's heart quickened. "How bad is it? It's better if you see for yourself. But I'll be honest, if we can't rehabilitate him quickly, we may have no choice but to euthanize." 20 minutes later, Clara was driving her beat-up truck down the winding mountain roads. Her mind raced with possibilities. In her 10 years of wildlife rehabilitation, she'd seen all manner of injured and traumatized animals. But a leopard? That was new territory. The State Wildlife Facility came into view, a sprawling complex of buildings and enclosures nestled in a quiet valley. Dr. Martinez met her at the entrance, his face grave. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Follow me." They walked through sterile corridors to the quarantine area. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. Through a heavy door, they entered a dimly lit room. Clara's breath caught in her throat. In a reinforced cage at the far end, a male leopard lay curled in the corner. His once magnificent coat was dull and patchy, marked with scars that told stories of countless fights. But it was his eyes that struck Clara the hardest. Amber orbs filled with a terror so deep it made her chest ache. "This is Kale," Dr. Martinez said softly. "We found him in a basement fighting ring. The owner used him for illegal animal fights." He paused, letting the horror of that sink in. "He's severely traumatized. Won't let anyone near him, not even to treat his wounds." Clara moved closer to the cage, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hey there, beautiful," she whispered. The leopard's muscles tensed visibly, his ears flattened against his skull. "Be careful," Martinez warned. "He's extremely unpredictable." Clara took another step forward. Kale's reaction was explosive. He launched himself at the cage bars with a roar that shook the room. His claws slashed through the air where Clara had been standing just seconds before. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding. "That's his typical response to human presence," Martinez said, helping her steady herself. "We've tried everything. Different handlers, various approaches. Nothing works. He's too damaged, too dangerous." Clara couldn't tear her eyes away from Kale, who had retreated back to his corner. His sides heaved with panicked breaths, but beneath the fear, she saw something else, something that called to her very soul. "How long?" she asked. 3 days, Martinez replied. "That's all the time we can give him. If we can't see any improvement by then, we'll have to make the hard call." Clara watched as Kale pressed himself further into the corner, trying to make himself invisible. In his terrified eyes, she saw more than just an animal's fear. She saw a broken spirit, desperate to trust but too wounded to risk it. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I'll work with him." Martinez frowned. "Clara, this isn't like rehabilitating coyotes or hawks. This is a full-grown male leopard with severe trauma. He could kill you in seconds. Look at him, Clara insisted, gesturing toward the trembling cat. That's not aggression we're seeing, it's pure terror. He's not attacking because he's mean. He's attacking because he's never known anything but pain from humans. She turned to face Martinez fully. 3 days isn't enough. I need at least 2 weeks. That's not possible. The facility can't. Then I'll take him to my sanctuary. Clara interrupted. I have the permits. I have a suitable enclosure. Let me try. Martinez shook his head. It's too risky. The liability alone. I'll sign whatever waivers you need, Clara said. Her voice softened as she looked back at Cale. He deserves a chance. Every living thing deserves at least one person willing to fight for it. The leopard's ears twitched slightly at the sound of her voice. For a brief moment, his eyes met hers, and Clara felt the connection deep in her bones. This wasn't just another rehabilitation case. This was a calling. Martinez studied her for a long moment. You really think you can reach him? I have to try, Clara replied simply. Otherwise, we're just giving up on him. And look at him. He's already had too many people give up on him. After what seemed like an eternity, Martinez nodded slowly. I'll need to make some calls. There will be paperwork, lots of it. And Clara. He caught her arm as she turned to leave. Be careful. Sometimes our hearts make us take risks. Our heads know better than to take. Clara looked back at Cale, who watched them with wary eyes from his corner. Sometimes our hearts know exactly what risks are worth taking, she said softly. I'll be back tomorrow to start the transfer arrangements. As she drove home that evening, Clara couldn't shake the image of those haunted amber eyes. She knew the challenge ahead would be immense. She knew she was possibly risking her life. But she also knew, with absolute certainty, that she had to try. Cale's life hung by a thread, but she was determined to be the one person who wouldn't let that thread break. Clara watched from her truck as the transport cage containing Cale was carefully unloaded at her sanctuary. The morning mist still clung to the Montana hills, casting an ethereal glow over the facility she'd built from the ground up. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. Easy now, she called out to the handlers. Keep the movements slow and steady. Her voice remained calm despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. Once the transport was secure, the state officials gathered around her. Their faces showed a mix of concern and skepticism. Ms. Hensley, said Regional Director Thompson, a stern woman in her 50s. I need to be absolutely clear about the timeline. You have exactly 4 weeks to show meaningful progress with this animal. If he's not showing signs of rehabilitation, by then, we'll have no choice but to proceed with humane euthanasia. Clara nodded, keeping her expression neutral even as her heart sank. I understand. With all due respect, chimed in Dr. Wilson, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. This leopard has severe trauma. 4 weeks is hardly enough time to. It's all we can allow, Thompson cut in. Resources are limited, and we can't justify housing an animal that may never recover. After they left, Clara stood alone before Cale's temporary enclosure. The leopard had retreated to the furthest corner, his massive form pressed against the wall. His amber eyes darted frantically, tracking every movement beyond the bars. Hey there, she whispered, maintaining a safe distance. You're safe now, I promise. Cale's only response was to press himself even harder against the wall, as if trying to melt into it. He hasn't touched the food from yesterday, came a quiet voice behind her. Clara turned to see Jonas Whitlock approaching, his weathered face creased with concern. The former ranch hand had been helping out at neighboring properties, and his steady presence had become a comfort over the past few months. They're giving me 4 weeks, Jonas, Clara said, her voice tight. 4 weeks to help him trust again after years of abuse. Jonas moved to stand beside her, his calloused hands resting on the fence. If anyone can do it, it's you. I've seen how you work with the difficult cases. This is different, Clara replied, watching as Cale's muscles trembled visibly even from their distance. Look at him. He's not just afraid, he's completely shut down. Throughout that first day, Clara attempted to establish a routine. She placed fresh water and meat at regular intervals, always announcing her presence with soft words. Each time she approached, Cale's reaction was the same. He would flatten himself against the wall, pupils dilated with fear. By evening, the food remained untouched. Clara sat on a bench nearby, documenting her observations in a notebook when Dr. Chen, her longtime colleague, stopped by. "Clara, I've reviewed his medical history," Chen said, her face grim. "The physical scars are just the surface. There's evidence of prolonged malnutrition, stress-induced organ damage, and likely neurological effects from repeated head trauma." "From the fighting ring," Clara whispered, her pen stilling mid-sentence. "Yes, and given the timeline we're working with," Chen hesitated. "Maybe it would be kinder too." "No," Clara cut her off firmly. "I won't give up on him before we've even started." After Chen left, Jonas returned with some spare lumber he'd been using to repair fencing. He found Clara still at her observation post, though night was falling. "You should get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow's another day." Clara shook her head. "He still hasn't eaten. If he doesn't take food soon." She couldn't finish the sentence. Jonas settled beside her on the bench. "What's your gut telling you about him?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, watching Cale's shadowy form in the growing darkness. That there's still something there. Behind all that fear, there's an intelligence, a presence. But it's like he's trapped behind walls of his own trauma. "Then that's what you work with," Jonas said simply. "Start there." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Clara made one final check. The sanctuary was quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl. As she approached Cale's enclosure with her flashlight pointed at the ground, she noticed something different. The leopard had moved slightly away from his corner, though he quickly retreated when he heard her footsteps. Clara crouched down, speaking softly. "I know you're scared. I know humans have given you every reason not to trust us. But I'm going to show you that things can be different." She placed a small piece of meat closer to the entrance of the enclosure than the main feeding area, then retreated to a greater distance than she'd maintained during the day. After 30 minutes of absolute stillness, she saw Cale shift slightly. His nose twitching at the scent of food. It wasn't much, just the smallest indication that he might eventually eat with someone present, but it was something. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched him, understanding with crushing clarity the mountain they would have to climb together. In an impossibly short time, the state's deadline loomed in her mind like a shadow. 4 weeks to help this magnificent creature find his way back from the depths of trauma. 4 weeks to prove that compassion could overcome cruelty. 4 weeks to save his life. As she finally headed home that night, Clara's determination solidified into resolve. She would find a way to reach Cale, no matter what it took. The alternative was simply unthinkable. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Clara heard the crunch of expensive tires on gravel. She looked up from where she was preparing Cale's breakfast to see a black luxury SUV pulling into the sanctuary's modest parking area. The car's gleaming surface seemed out of place among the weathered buildings and practical pickup trucks. A tall man in expertly tailored suit stepped out, his pale blue eyes scanning the property with obvious disdain. 2 other men flanked him, their stances suggesting they were more security than business associates. Clara felt her spine stiffen as the man's gaze finally settled on her. "Miss Hensley," he called out, his voice carrying an edge of artificial warmth. "I'm Silas Rourke. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Clara set down the meat preparation tools and wiped her hands on her work apron. "Mr. Rourke, I've heard your name mentioned." She kept her voice neutral, though her heart had begun to race. This was the man responsible for Cale's condition. Then you know I'm here about my leopard. Rourke walked closer, his Italian leather shoes somehow avoiding the dust. A regrettable misunderstanding with local authorities. I'm here to rectify the situation. There's no misunderstanding, Clara replied firmly. Seal was seized during a legal raid. He's now under state protection. Rourke's smile didn't reach his eyes. Cale? How quaint. You've named him already. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, dabbing at his forehead in the morning heat. Let me be clear, Miss Hensley. That animal is dangerous stock, requiring specialized handling. You're little. He glanced around the sanctuary with obvious contempt. Operation is hardly equipped for such a specimen. You mean it's not equipped for fighting rings? Clara's words came out sharp as steel. The artificial warmth vanished from Rourke's face. Careful, Miss Hensley. Unfounded accusations can lead to unfortunate consequences. Jonas's truck pulled up at that moment, and Clara had never been more grateful for his timing. He climbed out slowly, his eyes taking in the scene before him. Without a word, he walked over to stand slightly behind Clara, his presence solid and reassuring. I've already filed the necessary paperwork, Rourke continued, his tone businesslike again. Your permit for handling Class 1 predators will be under review by this afternoon. I have serious concerns about public safety, you understand. Clara felt her face flush with anger. You're worried about public safety? After what you did to him? Clara, Jonas murmured in warning, but she couldn't stop herself. I've seen his scars, she pressed on. The deliberate wounds. The marks from chains. You didn't keep him for conservation or education. You kept him for blood sport. Rourke's pale eyes turned glacial. You should listen to your friend, Miss Hensley. You're stepping into waters far deeper than you realize. He gestured to his men, who had been standing silently nearby. I'll give you 24 hours to reconsider your position. After that, things will become official. As they turned to leave, Rourke paused. Oh, and Miss Hensley? I'd be careful about spreading wild stories. They tend to reflect poorly on the storyteller's mental stability. Quite relevant when reviewing handling permits, don't you think? They watched as the black SUV pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Clara's hands were trembling with suppressed rage. Clara, Jonas said quietly, that man is dangerous. I know. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with determination. But so is what he did to Cale. You should have seen the medical reports. Jonas, the systematic abuse, the deliberate cruelty. I won't let him take Cale back. I won't. He's got money and influence, Jonas warned. People around here know his name, and they're scared of him. Then they should be ashamed, Clara shot back. Being scared of someone like that just gives him more power. She walked over to Cale's enclosure, where the leopard had pressed himself into his usual corner during the confrontation. His amber eyes were wide, his breathing rapid. Something about Rourke's voice had triggered a visible reaction in him. It's okay, she said softly to Cale. He's gone. And I promise you, you're never going back there. Jonas joined her at the fence. What's your plan? First, I call every wildlife authority and animal welfare organization I know. Document everything. Build a paper trail. Clara's mind was already racing ahead. Then I reach out to local media. If Rourke wants to play the public safety card, let's show people what real danger looks like. He'll fight back, Jonas cautioned. Hard. Let him. Clara watched as Cale's breathing slowly steadied, though he remained pressed against the wall. Look at him, Jonas, really look. Everything that animal is right now, all that fear, all that pain, it's because of men like Rourke who think money puts them above decency, above law, above compassion. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, but firm. All right, but you're not doing this alone. Whatever comes next, I'm with you. Clara felt a rush of gratitude for his steadfast support. She knew the battle ahead would be difficult. Rourke had wealth, connections, and a ruthless determination to reclaim his property. But looking at Cale, seeing the living evidence of what that man was capable of, Clara felt her own determination harden into something unbreakable. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and documentation. Clara photographed Cale's injuries, again compiled medical reports, and reached out to every contact she had in animal welfare. By afternoon, just as Rourke had promised, she received notice that her handling permit was under review, but Clara refused to back down. She would fight for Cale with every resource she had. The broken leopard in that enclosure deserved a chance at healing, at trust, at a life free from cruelty. And Clara would make sure he got that chance, no matter what it cost her. Clara knelt beside Cale's enclosure, her notebook balanced on her knee as she made careful observations. The morning sun cast long shadows through the fence, creating strips of light that fell across the leopard's spotted coat. He lay in his usual corner, amber eyes fixed on her with unwavering attention. "That's it, just stay calm," she murmured, noting how his breathing remained steady today, a small improvement from the panicked panting of previous sessions. "We're making progress, aren't we?" As she sketched his posture and recorded his reactions, Clara noticed something she hadn't seen before. In the better light, patterns emerged among his scars, not the random marks she'd expect from years of pressing against cage bars or routine handling. These were different. She leaned closer to the fence, squinting. Along Cale's flanks, she could make out long curved marks that could only have come from claws. Across his face and shoulders, distinctive puncture scars spoke of bite wounds that had healed poorly. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "Oh God," she whispered, her pen falling from suddenly numb fingers. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. "Brought you some coffee," Jonas said, setting down a thermos. He paused when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" Clara pointed with a trembling hand. "Look at those scars, Jonas. Really look at them." Jonas crouched beside her, his weathered face growing serious as he studied the sleeping leopard. After years of working with livestock, he knew what fighting wounds looked like. "These aren't just from being kept in poor conditions," Clara said, her voice tight with anger. "Someone was forcing him to fight." Jonas nodded grimly. "Seen similar marks on dogs from fighting rings. But a leopard." He shook his head in disgust. Clara flipped through her earlier notes frantically. It explains so much. His extreme fear of humans, the way he panics in confined spaces when people are near. They weren't just keeping him captive. They were forcing him to fight other animals. She remembered Cale's violent reaction when she'd first approached him, how he'd struck the bars in terror. Not just fear of humans, fear of what humans forced him to do. "We need to document everything," she said, retrieving her fallen pen. "Every scar, every behavioral response that might be connected to fighting." Jonas helped her photograph Cale's injuries from various angles while keeping a respectful distance. The leopard watched them warily but remained still, as if sensing their intent wasn't to harm. "Some of these wounds," Jonas said quietly, examining the photos on Clara's camera, "they're deliberate. See how these cuts on his haunches are evenly spaced? Someone was hurting him to make him aggressive." Clara felt sick. She'd known Silas Rourke was cruel, but this suggested something far more sinister than a wealthy man's illegal menagerie. This was organized, systematic abuse. "There must be others," she said. "Other animals, other properties. No one sets up something like this for just one leopard." Jonas's expression darkened. "Rourke's got money and connections. People around here don't ask questions when he's involved." "Well, I'm asking questions now." Clara began making detailed notes about each scar, creating a timeline of Cale's injuries. "This isn't just about saving one animal anymore. If we can prove what was happening, it's dangerous ground, Clara. Jonas warned. Men who run fighting rings don't take kindly to interference. She met his concerned gaze. I can't ignore this. Every mark on his body is evidence. Every frightened reaction is testimony to what they did to him. Cale stirred in his corner, and Clara noticed how he pressed himself against the wall whenever. He heard a sudden noise, not just in fear, but as if expecting an attack from any direction. How many times had he been thrown into an arena, forced to fight for his life? We'll need more than just photos and notes, Jonas said after a while. Fighting rings leave other traces, specialized equipment, betting records, contact lists. Clara nodded, adding another page to her growing documentation. And witnesses. Someone must have seen something, known something was wrong. She looked at Cale, who had dozed off in his corner, twitching slightly in his sleep. His scars told a story of prolonged suffering, but they also offered hope, evidence that could bring down the people responsible and prevent other animals from sharing his fate. The deadline to rehabilitate him isn't just about proving he can trust again, she said. It's about gathering enough evidence before Rourke finds a way to shut us down. Jonas placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. You're not in this alone. We'll figure it out together. Clara reached through the fence, not quite touching Cale, but letting him sense her presence. The leopard's eyes opened slightly, meeting hers. There was pain there and fear, but also something else, a spark of resilience that hadn't been completely extinguished. We're going to make this right, she promised him softly. All of it. Her heart pounding, Clara reached for her phone and dialed Jonas. Within minutes, he appeared at the sanctuary, his work boots kicking up dust as he strode toward her. Look at these marks, Clara said, pointing to Cale's scars. They're not random, these are fighting wounds. Jonas crouched beside her, his weathered face creasing with concern. You're right. I've seen similar marks on cattle that got into bad fights, but these, he gestured to a particularly deep scar along Cale's shoulder. These are deliberate, orchestrated. Over the next few days, they began quiet investigations. Jonas used his connections from his ranching days to ask careful questions about Rourke's estate. Clara searched online records, finding disturbing patterns of exotic animal shipments to his property. Look at this, Clara whispered one evening, showing Jonas her laptop screen. Every 3 months, like clockwork, new animals arrive. But there are no records of what happens to them afterward. And I've heard whispers, Jonas added, his voice low, about underground gatherings at remote properties. Rich folks betting big money on things they shouldn't. As they dug deeper, Cale's behavior grew more erratic. The leopard began pacing his enclosure at night, his agitation visible in the way. He flinched at every shadow. Clara spent extra hours with him, trying to maintain the fragile trust they'd built. One particularly dark night, Clara jolted awake to the sound of breaking glass. The acrid smell of smoke filled her small house adjacent to the sanctuary. She scrambled out of bed, her heart stopping when she saw the orange glow coming from the barn. Cale, she screamed, running barefoot across the gravel path. The barn door had been forced open, and flames were already climbing the wooden walls. Through the thickening smoke, she could hear Cale's terrified roars. Clara rushed inside, coughing, as the smoke burned her lungs. The heat was intense, making her eyes water as she stumbled toward Cale's enclosure. The leopard was pressed against the back of his cage, panic evident in his wide eyes. I'm coming, she called out, fumbling with her keys. Her hands shook as she tried to find the right one for the security lock. The flames were spreading rapidly now, crawling across the ceiling beams with frightening speed. Suddenly, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her backward. Clara, get out. Jonas's voice cut through the roar of the fire. The roof's about to come down. No, I can't leave him. She fought against Jonas's grip, but he was stronger, dragging her toward the door. Just as they cleared the threshold, there was a deafening crack as one of the main support beams gave way. They tumbled onto the grass, Clara still struggling to get back to the barn. Jonas held her firmly as she watched in horror while flames engulfed the structure. "Cale," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Please, we have to help him." The local fire department arrived minutes later, but it felt like hours to Clara as she watched them battle the blaze. She sat on the ground, Jonas's jacket around her shoulders, both of them covered in soot and watching anxiously as the firefighters worked. Finally, when the flames were under control, they were able to approach Cale's enclosure. Through some miracle, the metal structure had protected him from the worst of the fire. The leopard was terrified but alive, his coat singed but otherwise unharmed. Clara fell to her knees in relief, tears cutting tracks through the ash on her face. The sanctuary had suffered extensive damage, the barn was nearly destroyed, and several other enclosures were compromised. But Cale had survived. As she watched the firefighters complete their investigation, Clara knew this was no accident. The broken glass, the forced door, this was a message. Rourke was showing her just how far he would go to get what he wanted. Jonas stayed with her as the sun rose, his presence steady and reassuring. "We'll rebuild," he said firmly, looking at the smoking ruins of the barn. "And we'll find proof of what he's doing. He won't get away with this, Clara." She nodded, her determination rising from the ashes like a phoenix. The attack had only strengthened her resolve to expose Rourke's cruelty and save Cale. But as she surveyed the damage to her sanctuary, she realized just how dangerous their investigation had become. This was no longer just about saving one leopard. It was about stopping a man who would burn down a building with living creatures inside. Just to protect his secrets, Clara sat at her desk, surrounded by notebooks filled with observations of Cale's behavior. The sanctuary was quiet in the pre-dawn hours, save for the gentle hum of the space heater. Her fingers traced over the pages of meticulous notes she'd taken since Cale's arrival. "There has to be a pattern," she muttered, rubbing her tired eyes. The barn fire had only strengthened her resolve. Someone, likely Rourke, had tried to destroy everything she'd built, but they hadn't succeeded. Both she and Cale had survived, and now she was more determined than ever to understand what made the leopard tick. She picked up her latest journal, flipping through the detailed accounts of Cale's reactions. Some days were better than others. Sometimes he would accept food without retreating to the corner of his enclosure. Other times he would become absolutely terrified, thrashing against the bars with such force that she feared he would hurt himself. What's different about those moments? She wondered aloud, spreading her notes across the desk. She began marking dates and times, creating a timeline of Cale's worst episodes. There had to be something she was missing. The sound of gravel crunching under tires drew her attention. Through the window, she saw Jonas's truck pulling up. He'd been helping with repairs to the barn, arriving early each morning before heading to his regular job. "Brought you some coffee," he said as he entered, setting a steaming cup on her desk. He smelled of his usual aftershave, a woodsy scent that reminded her of pine trees. As the aroma wafted through the room, she noticed something strange. Cale remained calm in his enclosure. That's when it hit her. Clara sat up straighter, her mind racing. "Jonas, what cologne do you wear?" He looked surprised by the question. "Just regular aftershave from the drugstore." "Why?" "Because Cale doesn't react to it at all." She stood up, pacing the small office. "But last week, when that state inspector came by wearing that expensive cologne," she flipped through her notes. Frantically, "Here it is, Cale had one of his worst episodes that day." Jonas leaned against the desk, following her train of thought. "You think it's the smell?" "Not just any smell." Clara's voice trembled with excitement and anger. "I remember that cologne. It's the same one Rourke wears, that sickly sweet, expensive stuff. I noticed it when he came here threatening to shut us down." She hurried to Cale's enclosure, Jonas following behind. The leopard was lounging on his platform, relatively relaxed. Clara pulled out her phone and quickly searched for the cologne brand she suspected. The images matched her memory of the bottle she'd glimpsed on Rourke's desk during their confrontation. "We need to test this," she said, her voice firm with determination. "If we can prove Cale's trauma response is specifically triggered by something associated with Rourke, it would show the abuse came directly from him," Jonas finished her thought. Clara nodded, already forming a plan. "I need a sample of that cologne. And we need to document everything. Video evidence, behavioral logs, everything." Over the next few days, Clara carefully documented Cale's baseline behavior. Jonas helped her set up video cameras to capture the Leopard's reactions from multiple angles. When a small sample of the cologne arrived, Clara prepared for the test with both excitement and apprehension. "Ready?" she asked Jonas, who stood by with the camera rolling. She opened the bottle at a safe distance from Cale's enclosure. The effect was immediate and heartbreaking. The moment the scent reached him, Cale's entire demeanor changed. His muscles tensed. His eyes widened in terror, and he began pacing frantically. When Clara moved slightly closer with the cologne, he let out a guttural roar and slammed himself against the back wall of his enclosure, trying to get as far away as possible. "That's enough," Clara said quickly, sealing the bottle and moving away. She felt sick to her stomach watching Cale's distress, but they had what they needed. The video clearly showed his dramatic reaction to the specific trigger. "Look at him," Jonas said softly as they watched Cale gradually calm down once the scent dissipated. "He wasn't born violent or dangerous. This was done to him." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "Rourke did this to him. He broke this beautiful creature, and then had the nerve to claim Cale was inherently dangerous." She turned to Jonas, her eyes blazing with determination. "This is proof that Cale can heal. His fear isn't random. It's a direct response to his abuser. If we can help him work through this specific trauma," she trailed off as she watched. Cale slowly returned to his platform. His breathing was still rapid, but he was calming down. In that moment, Clara saw more than just a traumatized animal. She saw living proof that Rourke's cruelty could be overcome. "We'll need to document more trials," she said, already writing in her journal. "Different scents as control tests. Varying distances, multiple scenarios. We need to build an ironclad case showing that Cale's reactions are specific to Rourke's cologne." Jonas nodded, reviewing the footage they'd captured. This could be the key to saving him and bringing down Rourke. Clara approached Cale's enclosure slowly, keeping her distance but letting him see her. "We're going to get through this," she promised softly. "He can't hurt you anymore." Clara scanned her latest journal entries, analyzing every detail of Cale's behavior patterns. She needed to prove his progress before time ran out. After the barn fire, pressure from officials had only increased. They wanted concrete evidence that Cale could be rehabilitated, and they wanted it now. Taking a deep breath, Clara made a bold decision. She would organize a public evaluation. Let them all see Cale's progress with their own eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up her phone to make the necessary calls. On the morning of the evaluation, Clara arrived early at Cale's enclosure. The autumn air was crisp, and her breath formed small clouds as she checked every detail one final time. She had arranged chairs in a semicircle at a safe distance from the enclosure, ensuring both visibility and security. One by one, they arrived. Wildlife officials in their pressed uniforms, local veterinarians who had expressed doubts, and several members of the state board. Clara's heart sank when she spotted Silas Rourke's sleek black car pulling up. He stepped out wearing an expensive suit and that signature cologne that had triggered Cale so many times before. "Miss Hensley," Rourke said with a cold smile. "Quite the show you've arranged." Clara squared her shoulders. "This isn't a show, Mr. Rourke. This is about proving that every animal deserves a chance at healing." The audience settled into their seats, clipboards and evaluation forms at the ready. Clara could feel their skepticism like a physical weight. She approached Cale's enclosure, speaking softly as she always did. "Hey there, big guy. It's just another morning, you and me." But Cale could sense something was different. He paced nervously, his muscles tense under his dull coat. When he caught Rourke's scent, he retreated to the far corner of his enclosure, trembling. Clara's heart ached. Months of careful progress seemed to evaporate in seconds. She heard murmurs from the audience, saw pens scratching against paper. Failure wasn't an option, not just for her, but for Cale. "It seems your experiment has reached its natural conclusion," Rourke announced loudly. "The animal is clearly beyond rehabilitation." Clara ignored him, focusing entirely on Cale. She began her normal routine, speaking in the same gentle tone she used every day. "I know you're scared," she said softly, "but I'm right here with you. Nothing bad is going to happen." Minutes ticked by. The audience grew restless. Clara continued her calm monologue, sharing stories about her day, about the sanctuary, about anything that came to mind. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Cale's trembling began to ease. "That's it," she encouraged. "You're safe here." To everyone's surprise, Cale took a tentative step forward, then another. His amber eyes remained fixed on Clara, deliberately avoiding. Looking at the audience, especially Rourke, Clara's heart pounded as she slowly, very slowly, extended her hand toward the enclosure. This was the moment of truth. Everything they had worked for came down to this. Cale hesitated. The audience held their breath. Clara remained perfectly still, her hand outstretched. Palm up. A gesture of trust. And then it happened. Cale moved forward, his movements cautious but deliberate. He approached Clara's hand, and in a moment that seemed to stretch forever, he allowed her to rest her palm gently on his scarred shoulder. Gasps erupted from the audience. Clara heard papers rustling, chairs creaking as people leaned forward for a better look, but she didn't dare move. She kept her touch light and steady, feeling the powerful muscles beneath her hand, the rough fur marked by old wounds. "Remarkable," one of the officials whispered. Even Rourke seemed momentarily speechless, his usual smug expression replaced by something that looked almost like worry. The contact lasted only a few seconds before Cale stepped back. But it was enough. Clara had done what everyone said was impossible. She had earned the trust of an animal. They had all written off as hopeless. Tears pricked at her eyes as she watched Cale retreat to a comfortable distance. He wasn't cowering now, just maintaining his space. Progress. Real, undeniable progress. The lead official cleared his throat. "Miss Hensley, this is unprecedented. We'll need to review all the documentation, but what we've witnessed today certainly suggests significant rehabilitation potential." Clara nodded, her eyes still on Cale. That brief moment of connection had validated everything she believed in, that patience and compassion could overcome even the deepest trauma. For the first time since Cale had arrived at her sanctuary, she felt true hope blooming in her chest. The triumphant moment of Cale's breakthrough hung in the air like delicate glass. Clara's heart soared as she maintained gentle contact with the leopard, his muscles gradually relaxing under her touch. The assembled crowd watched in stunned silence, many of them shifting forward in their seats. Even the most hardened skeptics couldn't deny what they were witnessing. But Silas Rourke's cold blue eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he watched the display. He pulled aside a gray-suited inspector during the brief recess that followed, their heads bent in whispered conversation. Clara noticed the exchange but was too focused on Cale to register its significance. The next morning, Clara's world shattered. The official report arrived by courier, its contents making her stomach lurch. The demonstration had been labeled inconclusive, the inspector claiming that one moment of compliance didn't prove lasting rehabilitation. The same inspector she'd seen speaking with Rourke. "This is impossible," Clara whispered, her hands trembling as she read further. "He was there. Everyone saw what happened." The phone rang. It was Jonas, his voice urgent. "Clara, they're coming. Right now, they have a court order." She rushed to Cale's enclosure, her breath coming in sharp gasps. 3 official vehicles were already pulling up the gravel drive, followed by Rourke's black car. Men in uniform emerged, carrying heavy restraint equipment and a transport cage. "You can't do this." Clara planted herself between them and Cale's enclosure. "He's making progress. Yesterday proved it." The lead officer stepped forward, holding out a document. "Ma'am, we have a court order citing public safety concerns. The animal has been deemed high risk and requires immediate relocation." "High risk? That's a lie." Clara's voice cracked. Rourke bribed the inspector. "This is all fabricated." Silas Rourke emerged from his car, straightening his expensive suit. "Miss Hensley, your emotional attachment is clouding your judgment. The proper authorities have spoken." Clara watched in helpless horror as the team moved in with their equipment. Cale, sensing the tension, began pacing in agitation. When they approached with the capture poles, he retreated to the corner of his enclosure, his amber eyes wide with fear. "Please," Clara begged, "at least let me help. He trusts me now. Don't destroy everything we've built." But they pushed her aside. The capture went badly, Cale's terror overwhelming his recent progress. He fought against the restraints, his horrible cries of distress echoing across the sanctuary. Clara's tears flowed freely as they forced him into the transport cage, his powerful body thrashing against the metal bars. "Where are you taking him?" she demanded, following them as they carried the cage toward their vehicles. Rourke's smile was thin and cruel. "That's no longer your concern, Miss Hensley. Though I doubt he'll be troubling anyone much longer." The meaning behind his words hit her like a physical blow. They would euthanize him, or worse, if Rourke had his way. Everything she'd worked for, every small victory and moment of progress, was being erased before her eyes as they loaded the transport cage into their truck. Cale's eyes found Clara's one last time. The trust they'd built was still there, but now clouded by confusion and betrayal. She had promised to protect him, and she was failing. Jonas appeared at her side, gripping her shoulder in silent support as they watched the vehicles pull away. The sanctuary felt suddenly empty, its purpose hollow. Clara's credibility lay in ruins, her judgment questioned, her methods declared inadequate by corrupted officials. "I can't let this happen," she whispered, her voice raw. "I can't let them kill him." But for the first time since she'd taken on Cale's case, Clara felt truly powerless. The system she'd trusted had been turned against her. Her sanctuary, her life's work, stood silent and judged. And somewhere in the distance, a transport truck carried away the creature who had come to represent everything she believed in, leaving only dust and despair in its wake. The weight of failure pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had promised Cale a safe haven, a chance at healing. Instead, she had watched him dragged back into darkness, unable to stop it. His terrified cries would haunt her dreams, a reminder of promises broken and trust betrayed. The phone rang. It was Jonas, his voice urgent. "Clara, they're coming. Right now. They have a court order to seize Cale." Clara dropped the report and ran to the enclosure. Through the morning mist, she saw 3 white vans approaching, their tires crunching on the gravel drive. Her heart pounded as she watched uniformed officers emerge, transport cages in tow. "Wait!" she called out, but they barely acknowledged her as they moved with practiced efficiency. Cale growled low in his throat, pressing himself against the back of his enclosure. The fear in his eyes broke Clara's heart, all their progress dissolving. In moments, Jonas's truck skidded into the lot, and he jumped out, running to Clara's side. "This isn't over," he said firmly, gripping her shoulder. "Remember the recordings?" Clara's eyes widened. In all the chaos of recent events, she'd almost forgotten the damning evidence they'd gathered. Hidden cameras had captured footage of Rourke's estate, the fighting rings, the injured animals, the crowds of wealthy spectators betting on blood. She and Jonas had risked everything to document it. "We need to get this to the right people," Jonas continued, his voice low and intense. "Not just local authorities, ones Rourke can't buy off. I have a contact at the state level who'll make sure this gets heard." Clara watched helplessly as the officers cornered Cale with catch poles, forcing him into a transport cage. His terrified roar echoed across the sanctuary. "How long will that take?" "They're taking him now. 24 hours, maybe less. My contact can fast-track an emergency hearing." "But Clara," Jonas turned her to face him, "you'll have to testify. Tell everything you've seen, everything you know. Are you ready for that?" Clara squared her shoulders, wiping away tears of frustration. "I've been ready since the day I saw his scars." The next day, the courthouse buzzed with tension. Local media packed the gallery, drawn by whispers of scandal involving the prominent Rourke family. Clara sat straight-backed beside her lawyer, while Jonas waited in the witness area with a laptop containing their evidence. Rourke swaggered in with an expensive legal team, shooting Clara a smirk that made her blood boil. But she noticed something beneath his confident exterior, a slight tremor in his hands, a tightness around his eyes. He knew what was coming. When Clara took the stand, she spoke with quiet intensity about Cale's journey. She described his initial terror, his slow progress, and the breakthrough moment of trust. Then she detailed the suspicious fire, the targeted harassment, and finally, her discoveries about Cale's true history. "Those aren't ordinary captivity scars," she testified, pointing to photographs. "They're systematic fighting wounds. And we have proof of where they came from." Jonas stepped forward with the laptop, and the courtroom lights dimmed. The footage played, stark and undeniable. Hidden cameras revealed the underground arena on Rourke's estate, the cages of abused exotic animals, and finally, Cale himself being forced into brutal fights for the entertainment of wealthy spectators. Gasps filled the courtroom. Rourke's face drained of color as his own voice came through the speakers, giving orders, placing bets, laughing at the animals' suffering. His lawyers scrambled to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. More witnesses came forward, former employees, driven by conscience to confirm the footage. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an insurmountable wall of truth. Rourke's carefully constructed facade crumbled before their eyes. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder through the stunned silence. "In light of this evidence, I am ordering the immediate cessation of all operations at the Rourke estate, pending a full criminal investigation. Additionally, all animals currently in Mr. Rourke's possession will be relocated to approved sanctuaries." Clara held her breath for the words she most needed to hear. Furthermore, the leopard known as Cale is to be returned to Ms. Hensley's care immediately. Her rehabilitation efforts have been deemed both competent and necessary. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Rourke was led away by officers, his empire collapsing in real time. Television cameras flashed, reporters rushed to file their stories, but Clara barely noticed. She turned to Jonas, who pulled her into a tight embrace. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved him." Clara shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "We did it, all of us who refused to look away from cruelty." Through the courthouse windows, she could see Rourke's luxury cars being impounded, the first visible sign of justice taking hold. But her thoughts were already racing ahead to Cale, imagining his return to the sanctuary where healing, real, lasting healing, could finally begin. The early morning mist rolled across the Montana hills as Clara walked the familiar path to Cale's enclosure. 6 months had passed since the courtroom victory that had transformed both their lives. The sanctuary was peaceful at dawn, filled only with the gentle sounds of awakening wildlife and the soft crunch of gravel beneath her boots. She carried a fresh breakfast for Cale, a routine that had once been fraught with tension and fear. Now it was their shared moment of connection. The large leopard's scarred face appeared at the fence line before she even reached it, his amber eyes bright with recognition rather than terror. "Good morning, beautiful," Clara whispered, her heart swelling as Cale moved closer. His coat, once dull from neglect, now gleamed in the early light. Though the physical scars from his fighting days remained visible, they told a different story. Now, one of survival and healing rather than cruelty. The sound of footsteps made her smile. Jonas approached, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to Clara, their fingers brushing in a gesture that had become sweetly familiar. "Over the months. Thought I'd find you here," he said softly, careful not to disturb the peaceful morning. "You're always up with the sun these days." "It's our best time," Clara replied, watching as Cale settled comfortably near the fence. "Look at him now, Jonas. Remember how he used to hide when anyone came near?" Jonas nodded, his expression warm with understanding. Hard to believe it's the same leopard who once couldn't bear a human presence within 20 feet. Clara knelt beside the fence, and Cale moved closer. Without hesitation, he pressed his head against the chain link, allowing her hand to rest against him through the barrier. The trust in this gesture, once unimaginable, brought tears to her eyes. "The state inspector was impressed yesterday," Jonas mentioned, settling beside her on the ground. "Said she'd never seen such a complete rehabilitation in an abuse case." Clara smiled, remembering the validation of that final inspection. "It means we can help more animals like him. The sanctuary's reputation is solid now. No one questions our methods anymore." The morning sun rose higher, painting the sanctuary in golden light. Clara thought back to those dark days when Rourke's influence had seemed unstoppable. Now he sat in a prison cell, his empire of cruelty dismantled. The evidence they'd gathered had led to the rescue of dozens more animals from fighting rings across 3 states. "You know," Jonas said thoughtfully, "I remember that first day you brought him here. Everyone said you were crazy to try." "Everyone except you," Clara reminded him, reaching for his hand. "I saw something in your eyes, this absolute certainty. That you could reach him, that's what I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were someone special. Someone who could see past surface scars to the heart beneath." Cale rumbled softly, pushing harder against Clara's hand. His trust had been hard-won, earned through countless hours of patience, setbacks, and tiny victories. Each step forward had required absolute faith in herself, in Cale's capacity to heal, and in the power of compassion over cruelty. "We all have our scars now," Clara mused, tracing the faint burn mark on her arm from the night of the fire. "But they remind us of what we overcame, not what we lost." Jonas squeezed her hand. "You transformed more than just Cale's life, you know. This place, the other animals we've saved since then, the new legislation against exotic animal fighting." He paused, looking at her with deep affection. "You transformed all of us who witnessed it." Clara leaned against his shoulder, watching as Cale stretched out contentedly in the morning sun. The leopard's eyes, once wild with fear, now held a peaceful awareness. He was home, truly home, and so was she. "I never thought, when I got that first call about him, that it would change everything," she said softly. "I just knew I had to try." "That's what makes you special," Jonas replied. "You never stop trying, never stop believing in the possibility of healing." Together, they sat in the growing warmth of the day, watching Cale doze peacefully. The sanctuary around them buzzed with life, other rescued animals beginning their daily routines, volunteers arriving for their shifts, the promise of more healing to come. Clara's heart felt full to bursting. Where once she had stood alone, doubted and dismissed, she now had proof of what compassion could achieve. She had Cale's trust, Jonas's love, and a future bright with purpose. The scars they all carried had become badges of honor, testaments to the triumph of kindness over cruelty. If this story warmed you tonight, subscribe and leave a single line that stayed with you. Your words shape tomorrow's story.